our next section of the presentation around grant reporting. Now that you've received the award, you've cashed the check, you're committed, and the funder is going to want to know how you are progressing along the way to achieve what you said you would do. And so you share this via reporting. I'm going to ask the panelists a little later, what are some creative ways in which we can report back to funders beyond just the typical, here are our outputs and here is what we think we were able to do. We'll also get into reporting frequency and intensity, and this really depends, right, on the kind of award you're getting. Typically, there are quarterly, biannual, or even just an end of project report. Again, it really just depends on the funder and the award type. All right, let's get into what is required here. Having a plan for tracking and reporting your data. So are you running a feeding program, a garden initiative, a beach cleanup, or are you hosting a series of virtual workshops, say on grant writing or cesspool conversion? Did you say that your projects would be reaching a number of folks, or did you promise to do a certain number of events? Did you have to report various types of demographic data, including age and gender identity, ethnicity, where folks live? Beyond this quantitative piece, do you have to share qualitative data? If that's the case, in your evaluation of the program participants, asking these really open-ended questions to understand how they were impacted by the experience, what they learned, what they got out of it. Even asking the questions are around where is there room for improvement? You know, is your project designed to change a behavior? Again, like I mentioned earlier, tracking the sentiments of your participants pre-award and post-award to see where you might have made some changes in behavior and mindset. At the last session, Dr. Gomes had talked about having a logic model, writing your theory of change and identifying what your activities, your outputs, your outcomes are going to look like. Go back to that. Go back to that and use that as your basis to kind of set up what you will need to be tracking internally. So that way you can gauge how well you are making progress towards your anticipated outcomes. There are a lot of ways in which you can do this. Free tools out there such as Google Form, Jotform. If you're hosting things virtually like on Zoom, there are even polling features within this platform that allow you to grab the data that you need. And then you'll be able to analyze that, synthesize it, and include it in your report. There are a number of things that you should be ready to report on. It's very clear that HCF does not want your 20 pages of receipts, but they are going to want to know, how have you spent the money, right? Did you spend it according to the categories you said, right? You made certain assertions around, I need X number of dollars for personnel or equipment. And if that's really not the case, we can start talking about communication with funder and how you let them know you need to make some adjustments to the original budget that you had. So be ready to report on your budget, your outputs, again, what you said you would be doing and the reach you would have in community and evidence of these activities. When pulling together a report, it's important to give yourself some time. You can't do it at the night before. Honestly, you can't. That's just really not enough time. You may be able to pull it off, but I don't think it'll be the work product that is really deserving of all of the hard work that you and your team put into in coordinating a project or program. So make sure you're giving yourself enough time, and also be mindful of other internal activities that you might have, such as end of fiscal year, team retreats, cutting payroll, vacation time. Be mindful of this. And so start early. Start early as you can, at least 4 to 6 weeks out, in crafting your report, and setting yourself up with some weekly reminders to let yourself know, hey, this is due. Are there other pieces that members of my team need to be contributing to? Check back in with them during those weekly meetings to make sure that whatever you're waiting for from them in order to complete the report is happening. I'm going to pause there and just check in with our panelists around creative ways that you have seen awardees report back to you. And also, let's have a conversation around where have you seen some of the awardees really struggle in their reporting? And what advice do you have for how they might improve this?
The thing that I'm always shocked with reports is I'll read a progress report or a final report and then go and do a site visit, talk story with the folks doing the work, talk story with the folks that are benefiting and being served by the work. And the awesome impact and benefit that's happening never really gets documented, or at least documented well. And I could never figure like what is that about? And I think going especially back to Douglas's comments about engaging the people who you work with, work for, serve, and expect to have the benefit, that you actually engage them and tell the story through their lived experiences. And then also, I think sometimes we're too close to our work, that sometimes we actually can't see the all these kinds of changes, especially the small ones, because we're looking for the big thing that we can say to our funder, boom, look at what we did. When in fact, there's like many, many, many small things that are happening that actually amount to a very big thing. The point of the matter is, we need you in order to have the kinds of changes and impacts that we're looking for. That's why we do funding. But until we understand those impacts, it's hard for us to continue to advocate or increase these kinds of resources to make sure that the work is happening on the ground. So it's a two-way thing, and this reporting piece is really critical.
So ask one more question. How do you stay out of trouble, right? Are there any situations where folks should not be commingling funds? I don't know. What just advice so that folks don't get into trouble as they're spending down their award?
I think that we are all learning how to understand measuring and reporting. And Hawaii Community Foundation, can be kind of confusing. We get calls from people and they want to know, well, what's the format that you want the report in? And it just varies because we have so many different grant programs and so many different people, and we don't have a standard, and we're trying to develop what we're doing. So we're like in transition, and we're learning from you, and we're developing things like as we're flying. So we're trying to learn from people, what do you measure that makes sense? But I think we're all learning because sometimes people report on outputs, a lot of outputs. And as Ashley mentioned, we're looking for how are we changing people's lives? So it's not necessarily about how many came to the program. It's actually those people who came, what change happened for them in their lives. So, I think that Bob mentioned a balance of qualitative and quantitative. I think we need those numbers because we need to be able to show that our program is a success. So we need your final reports to show us whether this stream of funding that we're putting into the community is actually making a difference. And the way that we do that is from your data, from your reports, we bring it all together, and then we take it out. And when we are proposing that we're going to spend $1 million or a couple million on something, we need to know that it's going to make a difference because we can show how that success is happening in the community. So your reports are important for us to be able to continue with streams of funding. As far as creativity, I think, short videos, I think long videos, nobody has time to read long reports or watch long videos anymore. We're into short bites of information. So if you can put together something that's really kind of snappy and quick and shows what's going on, I think that's probably the most creative. I also think that we're moving more towards oral reporting and interviews, at least I am. But because, as Bob has said, what is written and what we actually see and hear are sometimes very different. So you almost want to be able to kind of hear from people, and you do hear that there's a lot of great things happening in the community.
Douglas, advice on how folks can be strengthening their reports. And there was also a question maybe you can tackle. We may not all have the capacity to develop a great video that talks about the impact and reach of the program. Is that something folks can budget for and also use to submit as their report?
So I don't know if I'm the best resource for creative reporting, but I will say that I think too often, especially for more volunteer-led organizations or new organizations, we don't often invest enough in ourselves, right? And it might sound like a broken record, but when we prepare our budgets, especially for we as volunteer organizations, make sure you budget for people time, right? And because you need it to implement. And I think as it relates to financial systems or support, creative reporting as well. Yes, I think many funders, right, will acknowledge as long as it's reasonable, and you can make the case of how it all connects to the outputs and the outcomes, right? As Diane mentioned, that folks are looking for, put the money there, right? And hey, they can always say ineligible, they could take it out. But invest in yourself in that respect. I did want to say one or two pieces about the earlier question on staying out of trouble, for lack of a better word, right? As you framed it, Ashley. And I think it's a good segue in terms of the partnerships that we build with our funders. And so what I'm about to say is going to be really obvious, but I think is really worth stating. Great way to stay out of trouble is to take the ego out of the work. I think too often in organizations, you always see it in the paper, like the trips here, the splurging there, to really develop a discipline and accountability to where your scarce organizational resources go is one way to avoid a trap that many people fall into. I think the bigger thing, even more than that, and it's part of it, is building a culture of transparency and accountability. In my experience managing grants, big and small, we mess up. We overlook things change that are totally out of our control. To really be clear and transparent with the funders about that from day one, and to not try to I'm also really good at kind of reframing reports and making sure that everything sounds really clear and accountable in the end. But when we mess up or when things are out of our control, to kind of raise it early and often. With our funder, with our board, with our community members. I think that's a big part of this culture of accountability and transparency as well, for us to stay out of trouble and to be effective at our mission and also in managing grant funds.
Thanks.
I agree with that, Douglas. I think that transparency in how the money is accounted for, you should be reporting it regularly to some other group of people, to the staff or whoever else, so that other people are constantly seeing how the money is being spent and accounted for. Because there have been instances where people have taken the money and used it for other things, and the group just didn't know what was going on. So very important.
And that's why if you have a shared workspace and you are in the practice of uploading the information, sharing the information, having those weekly meetings, teams might be able to identify those issues early on. So thank you all for those great points, Douglas. You're right.